Well, there's been lots of talk this week, and I was in the chamber on Wednesday about whether the 20 years have been in vain. I don't think so. I think a lot of successes were achieved at that point in time. Look at women's rights, human rights, education, schools. You look at the fact that no acts of terrorism are committed from Afghanistan soil in 20 years. I think that our strategic aims were relatively successful over a period of time. But you cannot forever be embroiled in overseas conflict. And as I said earlier, I think there could have been a case, and I think that NATO could have made a case for retaining some kind of NATO footprint on the ground. And that is what should have happened. But once again, with the US making that unilateral decision to pull out, it's very difficult for NATO to be left behind without US support holding that fort.
Surely we need to step away from following US foreign policy if it's not going to be good for the West and it's not going to be good for the Middle East. I want to ask you about the immigration policy going forward. We know that we're going to be taking on board refugees, and we have, rightly so, we have a duty to do so after neglecting the country and abandoning them. But we still have to protect our own borders. We still have to protect our own domestic security too. So what do you think would be an appropriate measure to make sure that we are, first of all, prioritising women and girls, and that we are vetting these refugees so that they're not economic migrants?
Yeah, I mean, the simple fact of life is, and I said this in the chamber on Wednesday, is that the Foreign Office must not write cheques that it can't cash. At this point in time, the British government has a responsibility, first and foremost, to British nationals, and we need to get them out. And I said this in the week as well. We need to throw the kitchen sink at the non-combatant evacuation operation to make sure that we're not leaving people behind. But what we can't do is write a blank cheque to every other disaffected person and say to them that we can offer them safe haven in the UK. That is not going to happen. We absolutely have a responsibility to interpreters and those other Afghan nationals that are on the list of entitled personnel that the Foreign Office has identified and that exist as part of that scheme. But my view is this: we can talk about women and children, we can talk about women and girls, we can talk about the fate of those left behind in Kabul. That is just the reality, sadly, of war. We live in a difficult and dangerous world. 38 million Afghans at the moment who may want to live in a better place. And my heart goes out to every single one of them. But it's not the responsibility of the UK to offer that blank cheque to bring everybody back to the UK. It's physically and logistically impossible.
Yes, but at the same time, we've said we'll take 20,000 refugees over the next few years, 5,000 this year. Is that maintainable, or sustainable rather? Tom Tuggenhart said in the chamber that we don't want to get into a refugee auction, and people are saying 20,000 is not enough, but what number would be enough? Surely there has to be a cap, but is this an appropriate one?
Yeah, once again, where do you draw the line? 20,000, 40,000, 80,000. I mean, who knows? Is 5,000 too many? I just don't know. And the people that are employed to make these decisions, namely the Home Office and the Foreign Office, at the moment are working round the clock to make these very difficult calls. And we should be supporting them and not attacking them in the media. My humble view is that is a decision made between the Home Office and the Foreign Office based upon what is practical, what is affordable. We absolutely have to make a commitment to those who have supported coalition forces. We've got a commitment to those whose lives are most in danger. But once again, we cannot offer asylum to everyone. And at the end of the day, it's a line. It's like drawing a line in the sand. You pluck it from thin air. What is the right figure? I don't know. But 20,000 intuitively seems to be a reasonable commitment for those most in danger.
Okay, Colonel, one more question. In relation to a text that we've had from Philip in Gosport, the painful lesson learned is we should not interfere in other countries' internal matters. So this is the argument that we shouldn't be nation building. We shouldn't be going into foreign countries and trying to promote democracy and our way of life. But what would you suggest to people who say instead of doing that, perhaps we should take on board these countries as a territory and go back to our colonial/imperial ways of, if this country needs our support, we are there for good and we are there to take that on board?
Well, look, I mean, we're a small country of 60 million people. We don't have the right or the moral responsibility to intervene across the globe. When we go into certain countries, put boots on the ground is a pretty serious form of commitment. In fact, putting boots on the ground is the highest form of military commitment in my view. Therefore, we need to be absolutely clear what the imperative is, what our aims are, and they need to be achievable. I think in the case of Afghanistan 20 years ago, yes, of course, it's easy to look back over time. Now is not the time to do that. We've got bigger priorities right now, getting British nationals out. But the point I'm making is that the reasons why we went into Afghanistan in 2001 were legitimate. We had to remove Al-Qaeda. We had to smash the training camps. And I think that we've achieved those aims at that point in time. What we need to do now is make sure, once again, that Afghanistan does not become, again, a safe haven for terrorism.
And just to wrap up, Colonel, how do we do that? Is it just purely down to democracy at this point?
Well, once again, I think democracy in Afghanistan at this point in time is not necessarily in tandem. What we've got to do, as I said earlier, as much as we may not want to do it, is we've got to build a dialogue with those who are holding the reins of power in Afghanistan. We've got to work with our international partners. NATO's got to take a position on this. We've got to do what's necessary. And my humble view is that that is the priority as we go ahead, getting British nationals out and making sure, once again, that we work with those in Afghanistan. And we must continue to operate a permissive, safe, democratic, lawful environment in that troubled country, whereby women and children can go about their business, whereby we're not beheading people, we're not chopping off hands. We've got to make sure that it does not become a humanitarian disaster. And that is now the future priority for the Foreign Office.
Colonel James Sunderland there, thank you very much for your thoughts on this issue.